Imagine being inside a steel box in the Libyan desert. It's a blistering 120 degrees outside. Inside, the heat is suffocating. Your tank is moving forward, its engine roaring in the stifling hull. You hear the thudding of enemy artillery nearby. Your vision is limited to a narrow slit, but what you see terrifies you. The British Matilda's armor is thick. Your 47mm gun won't even scratch it. You know the odds. You can feel your heart racing in the claustrophobic heat, knowing your tank will be vulnerable to the enemy's superior firepower. You are an Italian tank crewman in World War II, and you've been thrown into a war where your tanks, barely enough to fight, poorly designed for prolonged warfare, are now facing some of the most formidable armored forces ever created. The tanks you have are not designed for the task ahead. And yet, here you are, fighting in an epic struggle you are unlikely to win. This is the story of every Italian tank in World War II. The tanks that faced overwhelming odds, the machines designed for colonial wars that were thrust into the heart of an industrialized global conflict. A story of innovation, failure, and extraordinary courage. L3 of 33 and L3 of 35 Tankettes. Italy's tank program began with the smallest and least equipped tanks in history, the L3 Tankettes. Weighing just 3 tons, these tiny vehicles were armed with twin machine guns and were barely protected from rifle fire. Built primarily for colonial warfare, the L3s were quick, nimble, and could maneuver across difficult terrain, perfect for Italy's operations in Ethiopia and Spain. Over 2,000 were produced, but they weren't built for major engagements. The L3's limitations became painfully clear when they faced more heavily armed enemies in North Africa. While they were still used to harass infantry and supply lines, the L3 Tankettes were no match for Allied armor. Yet, they remained in service due to Italy's inability to replace them. Their story is a reflection of Italy's tank doctrine: small, tactical vehicles for quick and mobile engagements, not heavy clashes. Carro Armato, M11/39. The M11/39 was Italy's first medium tank, weighing around 11 tons. It mounted a 37mm gun in a fixed-hull mount, an awkward design, especially in battle. The gun's lack of mobility was a significant issue, as the entire tank had to rotate to engage targets. With its thin armor, the M11/39 was quickly obsolete, facing the superior British 2-pounder guns and outclassed by the British forces during Operation Compass. The M11/39 taught Italy a harsh lesson. Tanks that couldn't be effective in the field were a liability. Though its production was limited, it marked a significant step in the evolution of Italian tank designs. Carro Armato M13/40. The M13/40, Italy's most iconic tank, was built in large numbers, over 700, during the early years of the war. Armed with a 47mm gun and 42mm of armor, it was better than its predecessor, but still no match for newer Allied designs. In North Africa, the M13/40 performed better against earlier British tanks like the Matilda I, but it struggled against more advanced models. Its riveted armor would often break apart, causing deadly shrapnel injuries inside the crew compartment. Despite being outclassed by the more formidable British Matilda IIs, the M13/40 was deployed across multiple fronts and continued to serve until the end of the North African campaign. Carro Armato M14/41. The M14/41 was a refinement of the M13/40, with a more powerful engine and slightly improved air filters to handle desert conditions. However, by 1942, it was already outdated. The 47mm gun could still kill light tanks at close range, but the M14/41 struggled to compete with American and British tank designs. It was used in various theaters, including North Africa and the Soviet Union. But its mechanical issues and vulnerability in battle meant it was often relegated to secondary roles. Carro Armato M15/42. The M15/42 was Italy's last attempt to build a competitive medium tank. It mounted a slightly improved 47mm gun and a more powerful engine, but by 1943, it was already outdated. Only 82 units were produced, and the tank didn't see much combat under Italian command. After the armistice, Germany seized many of these tanks and used them in anti-partisan operations. The M15/42 was Italy's last real hope for a medium tank capable of matching Allied designs. But by the time it was introduced, it was already obsolete. Carro Armato L640. The L640 was a light tank designed to replace the aging L3 Tankettes. It was equipped with a 20mm cannon and a machine gun, and it served primarily in reconnaissance roles. It performed reasonably well in Italy, but when it faced enemy tanks or fortifications, it was helpless. Its thin armor and small cannon limited its effectiveness. Still, the L640 was used in various campaigns, including the defense of Italy. Semovente 75 of 18. The Semovente 75-18 was Italy's most successful self-propelled gun. Built on the M13/40 chassis, it mounted a 75mm infantry support howitzer and was used to provide fire support for infantry assaults. While it couldn't compete with the armor of heavy tanks, it was effective at close range and used in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. Italian crews learned to ambush enemy tanks and then retreat, which made the Semovente a viable force on the battlefield. Semovente 75 of 34. The Semovente 75-34 was a further improvement, mounting a 75mm anti-tank gun. It was capable of penetrating Sherman armor and proved effective in defensive roles. However, its late introduction, in 1943, meant that it couldn't influence the outcome of the North African campaign. After the armistice, the Germans took many Semovente 75-34s and used them in occupied territories. Semovente 90 of 53. The Semovente 90-53 was one of Italy's most powerful self-propelled guns, mounting a 90mm anti-aircraft gun. This weapon was capable of destroying any Allied tank at long range. However, it was not produced in large numbers, and its mechanical issues and open-top design limited its operational effectiveness. Despite its power, the Semovente 90-53 was not enough to change the course of the war. Carro Armato P26 of 40. The Carro Armato P2640, or P40, was Italy's most ambitious tank. It was designed to be Italy's answer to the American M4 Sherman, with a 75mm gun and sloped armor. However, production issues meant that only a few were completed before Italy signed an armistice in 1943. Germany later seized these tanks, but they were never used in significant combat under Italian command. Italian tanks are often dismissed as failures, but that judgment misses the point. Italian tanks weren't bad because Italian engineers were incompetent or Italian crews were cowards. They were inadequate because Italy was a second-tier industrial power attempting to fight a first-tier war. Italy's industry couldn't produce the alloys needed for thick armor. Their engines were underpowered because they lacked access to high-grade fuels and advanced metallurgy. Their guns were adequate for 1930s colonial warfare, but obsolete against modern armor. And Italy's strategic doctrine, built around quick, decisive wars, collapsed when faced with prolonged, attritional conflict. Italian tank crews fought with extraordinary courage. They charged British positions knowing they were outgunned. They held defensive lines in the desert until their ammunition ran out. They died in tanks that couldn't protect them, fighting a war their nation couldn't win. The story of Italian armor is a reminder that wars aren't won by courage alone. They're won by steel, industry, logistics, and the ability to adapt faster than your enemy. Italy had brave men. They didn't have the tools those men needed to survive. If you want to explore more about the tanks, ships, and aircraft that defined World War II, this channel covers the machines that shaped history with the depth and honesty they deserve. Consider subscribing for more serious military history content. And thank you for watching.